She walked slowly into the recital hall, clutching her music sheets tightly to her chest. The room was already buzzing with people, some laughing quietly, some talking in hushed tones, all of them waiting for the performers to start. She felt invisible, as if the air around her swallowed her presence. She had spent countless hours practicing at home, often late into the night, but here she was, another quiet face among a sea of confident performers. She had been overlooked before, dismissed as timid or too quiet to ever truly shine. The thought made her stomach twist, but she tried to push it aside and focus on the piano waiting for her at the front. The stage was bright under the harsh lights, and it seemed far away. She could see other performers already sitting at their pianos, smiling and waving to friends and family. Some were chatting comfortably with their teachers, who looked at them with pride. She had never felt like she belonged in that kind of attention. Even when she practiced at home, the piano was just a friend, a companion that never judged her mistakes. Her fingers had learned to speak in ways words never could. Still, stepping onto a stage in front of people felt different, almost impossible. She found a seat at the back, hoping to remain unnoticed until her turn. The murmurs of the audience made her heart race. She tried to take deep breaths, to calm the nerves that made her hands shake slightly. She closed her eyes for a moment and pictured herself at home, sitting at her piano, her fingers gliding over the keys with ease. That familiar feeling brought a small measure of comfort, though it did little to ease the anxiety that threatened to take over. Around her, people were talking about the performers they expected to impress everyone. Names were whispered with excitement, and she realized no one had mentioned her name once. She wasn't surprised, though it hurt more than she wanted to admit. She had been overlooked many times before, and this felt like just another instance of the same pattern. She wondered if she even belonged here, among so many others who seemed to have confidence she could only dream of. Her music sheets were worn at the edges, evidence of countless hours of practice. She had poured so much into her preparation, not for applause or recognition, but for the music itself. It was her escape, her way to express emotions that she could not say aloud. She had hoped that maybe, just maybe, someone would notice the depth and passion she had woven into every note. But doubt crept in, whispering that no one would see past her quiet exterior. The sound of clapping drew her attention to the stage, where another performer had just finished. The applause was loud, genuine, and the performer beamed under the praise. The audience seemed alive, engaged, and she felt a pang of longing. She wondered what it would feel like to receive that kind of acknowledgement, to have people truly hear what she had worked so hard to perfect. Her fingers twitched instinctively as she thought of the piano waiting for her turn. The music she would play carried her emotions, every note a reflection of moments she had lived through, both happy and painful. She took another deep breath, trying to steady herself. She looked around and noticed a few people observing quietly, not clapping or whispering, simply watching. Perhaps they would notice her in time. Perhaps they would understand that the quietest person in the room often held the most to say. She clutched her music sheets tighter, imagining the first note she would play. It was more than just a sound. It was a declaration that she existed, that her emotions mattered, that her efforts had meaning. The anticipation in the room was almost tangible. She could hear the soft shuffle of feet, the rustling of programs, and the occasional cough. The sounds that might have been distractions at home now seemed amplified, each one echoing in her mind. She tried to focus on the music, recalling the hours of practice, the corrections she had made to every phrase, every tempo, every subtle dynamic. She had worked tirelessly, learning to control her breathing, her posture, and the subtle movements that made her playing fluid and expressive. It was all part of a delicate balance she had come to master. As she sat there, she thought about her journey to this recital. It had not been easy. Many had told her that she was too shy, too quiet, or simply not suited for the spotlight. She had heard words of doubt from teachers, friends, and even strangers who didn't know her. Each word had stung, but instead of giving up, she had turned inward, allowing the piano to become her voice. She practiced late at night when the world was asleep, feeling the keys beneath her fingers and letting the music carry her through moments of fear and doubt. It had become a refuge, a place where she could express herself without words and without judgment. The quiet of the hall seemed to press in on her as she imagined stepping onto the stage. Her palms were clammy, her heart pounding in rhythm with the music she would soon play. She reminded herself that the piano had always understood her, that her hands knew the melodies she wanted to bring to life. Even if the world overlooked her, even if the audience's attention was elsewhere, she had to play for herself first. That was the only way the music would be honest and true. A teacher or mentor noticed her in the back and gave a small, reassuring nod. It was subtle, almost imperceptible to anyone else, but it meant everything to her. That silent acknowledgement told her that someone believed in her, that her efforts were valid and her talent real. It gave her a spark of courage, enough to steady her breathing and focus her thoughts. She clutched her music sheets one last time and prepared herself for the moment she would step into the light. The performer before her finished with a flourish, and the audience erupted in applause. She watched the clapping hands and cheering faces, feeling a mixture of admiration and longing. She reminded herself that when her turn came, she would give everything she had, not for the applause, but for the music itself. It was the only way she could truly communicate her feelings, the only way she could make her voice heard. The piano had been her companion through joy, sadness, and moments of uncertainty, and now it would carry her through the next chapter of her journey. She could feel the tension building as the next performer was called. Her name would be announced soon, and she would have to step forward. The thought made her stomach knot, but it also ignited a small flame of determination. She would not let fear dictate her performance. She would not let the whispers of doubt drown out the music she had nurtured for so long. Each note she would play was a piece of herself, a testament to the hours of dedication, the private struggles, and the unwavering love she held for the piano. She closed her eyes briefly, imagining the keys beneath her fingers, the sound of the first note resonating through the hall. She pictured the music flowing, each phrase carrying emotion, each pause filled with meaning. The thought gave her strength, a quiet confidence that had been growing inside her all these years. She was ready, or at least as ready as she could be. The recital hall, with its bright lights and expectant audience, no longer seemed quite so intimidating. As the final performer before her stepped down, the applause lingered in the air, and the hall began to settle. She stood, carrying her music sheets, and walked slowly toward the stage. Every step felt heavy with anticipation and possibility. She felt the eyes of the audience, or at least she imagined them, and reminded herself that the piano would do the speaking. She would let the music tell her story, her true story, in a way that words never could. And in that moment, she felt a quiet resolve forming within her, a readiness to step into the light and finally let her music be heard. She waited backstage, the sound of the audience fading slightly as she prepared herself. The bright lights of the hall shone through the curtains, casting shadows across the floor. Her heart was pounding in her chest, and she could feel the nerves twisting in her stomach. She had imagined this moment countless times, but now that it was real, it felt heavier than she had expected. She adjusted her posture and took a few deep breaths, trying to calm her racing thoughts. The stage seemed like a different world from where she stood. She could hear the soft echoes of the last performer's applause and the quiet shuffle of the audience settling into their seats. The anticipation in the air was almost tangible, pressing against her like a weight she could not lift. She looked down at her hands, resting on her music sheets, and reminded herself why she was here. It was not for recognition or applause. It was for the music, for the way it spoke when words could not. She thought back to all the hours she had spent practicing in the quiet of her room. Sometimes late at night, when the world was asleep, she would play until her fingers ached and her mind was lost in the melodies. Those were the times when the music had truly become her voice, a way to express feelings she could never say aloud. Each note she had practiced carried her emotions, her struggles, and her joys. She had hoped that one day, someone would feel what she felt when she played, but she never expected it to happen like this. Standing backstage, moments away from the spotlight, a mentor came over and gave her a quiet, reassuring nod. No words were needed. The gesture alone spoke volumes. It reminded her that someone believed in her, even if the rest of the audience did not. She felt a small flicker of courage light up inside her, enough to steady her breathing and focus her thoughts. She adjusted her music sheets and smoothed the creases from the pages, even though she had memorized the piece long ago. The ritual gave her a sense of control, something to hold onto in the midst of nerves. She could hear the next performer being called, and their steps on the stage sounded louder than usual. The applause rose and fell, and for a moment, she felt a pang of envy. She wished she could feel that kind of ease and confidence. But then she reminded herself that her strength lay elsewhere. She did not need to smile or wave to be recognized. Her music would do the speaking, and when she played, she would give everything she had. She closed her eyes briefly, imagining the first note she would play. She pictured the piano beneath her fingers, the keys responding to every movement with precision and grace. She remembered the subtle corrections she had made during practice, the small adjustments that made the piece flow naturally. Each phrase had been carefully crafted, not just for technical accuracy, but for emotional depth. She wanted the music to reach the hearts of those listening, even if they had not expected it. The lights of the hall seemed brighter now as she moved closer to the stage. Her steps felt heavy, each one echoing in her mind. She could hear the faint rustle of the audience, the low hum of conversation. For a moment, fear threatened to take over. She felt her palms grow sweaty and her legs shake. But she took a deep breath and reminded herself that she had faced this fear many times before, in practice rooms and quiet corners of her home. She knew she could do this. The piano was waiting, and it had always been on her side. Backstage, she adjusted her dress and smoothed her hair, trying to appear calm even though her heart was racing. She noticed other performers preparing as well, some chatting nervously with their teachers, others quietly tuning their instruments. She felt a sense of isolation, as if she were in her own world, separate from the others. That was okay. She had always worked best in solitude, letting the music flow without distraction. She had learned to rely on her own inner strength, and now it was time to put it to the test. A final check of her music sheets reassured her. The notes were familiar, etched into her memory, but seeing them one last time gave her a sense of security. She could feel the rhythm of the piece in her chest, the subtle patterns and pauses she had practiced over and over. It was almost like a heartbeat, steady and persistent, guiding her toward the moment when she would sit at the piano and let the music take over. The call for her performance came, and she felt a mix of fear and determination. She took one last deep breath, trying to calm the storm inside her. Her mentor gave her a final nod, and she stepped forward, her shoes clicking softly against the floor. The audience's murmurs faded into silence as she approached the piano. The stage felt enormous, but she reminded herself that it was just her and the music. She had nothing to prove to anyone else. The piano was her partner, her friend, her voice, and together they would tell a story. As she sat down, she felt the weight of anticipation settle on her shoulders. She adjusted the bench, placed her fingers on the keys, and closed her eyes for a brief moment. She imagined the sound of the first note, the way it would ripple through the hall, capturing attention and drawing people in. Her fingers trembled slightly, but she welcomed it. It was a sign that she cared deeply about what she was about to do. She thought about the audience, about the people who had overlooked her for so long. She did not seek revenge or recognition, but she wanted them to hear her truth, to understand the emotions she poured into every note. She had faced doubt and criticism before, and she had survived. Now it was time to transform that fear into music. She could feel the energy of the hall, the anticipation of the crowd, and she let it fuel her resolve. Her hands hovered over the keys, ready to begin. She could hear the faint breathing of the audience, the subtle rustle of programs, the quiet tension that filled the room. It all faded as she focused on the music, on the melodies that had lived in her heart for so long. She took a deep breath and pressed the first key. The sound filled the hall, soft and deliberate, carrying with it all the hours of practice, all the emotions she had stored inside. The music was hers, and she let it flow freely, unrestrained and true. Every note was intentional, every phrase carefully shaped to convey the depth of feeling she wanted to share. She could feel the connection between her fingers and the keys, the way the piano responded to her touch, and the way the sound traveled across the room. The audience, initially quiet and uncertain, began to lean in, drawn by the honesty and emotion in her playing. She was no longer just a quiet girl at the back. She was the music itself, and it commanded attention. As she continued, she felt a sense of liberation. The fear that had weighed on her all day began to lift, replaced by a quiet confidence. She was telling a story through the piano, and for the first time, it felt as if the world was listening. The hours of preparation, the late nights, the self-doubt, they all led to this moment. Each note was a reflection of her journey, a testament to her dedication, and a window into her soul. She played not for applause, not for recognition, but because it was who she was, and it was time for the world to hear it. She sat at the piano, her hands hovering above the keys, taking one last deep breath before beginning. The room was silent, and the silence pressed against her in a way that made her heart beat faster. For a brief moment, she wondered if she had imagined that anyone would notice her at all, if perhaps she would fade into the background like always. But then she reminded herself that it did not matter. The music had always been hers first, and now it would speak for her. Her fingers touched the keys, and the first note rang out. It was soft, deliberate, and carried a weight she could feel in her chest. The sound traveled through the hall, and she noticed the faint shift in the audience. Whispers stopped, heads turned slightly, and eyes began to follow the source of the music. She did not look up, focusing on the keys, on the way her fingers moved naturally, guided by countless hours of practice and passion. The next notes flowed, smooth and precise, yet full of emotion. Each phrase told a story, and she felt herself being swept along by the music. Her nerves began to settle as she connected with the piano, the instrument responding to her touch as if it were an extension of her own body. The audience, initially indifferent, started to lean forward in their seats, drawn by the sincerity and intensity of her playing. She could feel the emotion building within her, memories of late-night practices, moments of doubt, and quiet victories surfacing with each note. The music was a reflection of her journey, a language she had developed in private, but was now sharing publicly. Every chord carried her feelings, every pause a breath of her soul. The room was still, but there was energy in the air, an anticipation that was slowly transforming into awe. As she played, she noticed subtle reactions in the audience. Some faces softened, a few eyes glistened, and small, impressed murmurs rose quietly. She did not let it distract her. Instead, it fueled her confidence. The music took on a life of its own, and she surrendered to it completely. Her fingers moved effortlessly, as if the piano knew exactly what she wanted to say. The melody climbed and fell, weaving through moments of tenderness, tension, and release, creating a story only she could tell. She remembered the times she had been dismissed or ignored, the quiet comments from teachers or classmates who had underestimated her abilities. Each memory added a layer of determination to her playing. She did not seek revenge, but she wanted them to see, to hear the depth and passion she had hidden behind her quiet exterior. The music was her voice, clear and undeniable, and it carried the power to command attention without a single word. The hall, once filled with low chatter and restless shifting, was now completely focused on her. People leaned in, some unconsciously holding their breath, captivated by the unexpected intensity of the performance. She could sense the shift in energy, and it made her feel both vulnerable and exhilarated. She was no longer just a quiet girl in the back. She was a storyteller, a force of emotion made visible through sound. She moved into the more complex sections of her piece, where technical skill met raw emotion. Her hands danced across the keys, precise yet fluid, with each note carefully articulated to convey meaning. The audience responded with quiet amazement, their attention fully captured by the music. She felt a surge of pride, not in a boastful way, but as a quiet affirmation that all the hours of practice and sacrifice had led to this moment. Her focus remained unwavering, even as the music swelled to its climax. She could feel the intensity building inside her, the crescendo reflecting the culmination of years of dedication. Every chord resonated with the hall, filling every corner with sound, and she felt a connection not just to the piano, but to the people listening. She imagined each person feeling a fragment of her story, understanding her struggles, her joys, her fears, through the language of music. The softer passages followed, and she allowed herself to breathe within the music, giving space to the emotions to resonate. She noticed a few individuals with tears quietly forming, and it moved her in ways she had not expected. She had played for herself for so long that the idea of touching others so deeply was almost overwhelming. Yet she did not let it break her concentration. She let it guide her, making the performance more alive, more authentic. Each note was deliberate, each pause intentional, creating a rhythm that mirrored the highs and lows of life itself. She could feel herself becoming one with the piano, the music flowing seamlessly from her heart through her fingers and into the room. The audience seemed suspended in time, caught in the spell of a performance that was both technically masterful and profoundly human. The quiet girl they had overlooked was now the center of their attention, commanding it not with words or gestures, but through the truth of her playing. She imagined the countless nights spent in solitude, the small victories and moments of self-doubt that had shaped her. Each experience lent depth to her music, giving it authenticity that could not be taught or faked. The story within the notes was uniquely hers, and as she played, she felt a sense of release and fulfillment. She was telling her story without words, and it was being received with the attention and respect she had longed for. The final movements approached, and she felt the music intensify. Her fingers moved with precision and passion, the melody rising and falling, carrying every ounce of emotion she had poured into it. The audience was completely captivated, leaning in, watching, listening, and feeling the performance in a way she had never imagined. Every note seemed to echo in the hearts of those present, creating a shared experience between performer and listener that was intimate and powerful. She felt a surge of energy as the climax reached its peak, a combination of adrenaline, passion, and relief. She was no longer anxious or self-conscious. She was fully immersed in the music, in the act of expressing herself through the piano. The audience responded instinctively, some swaying slightly, others closing their eyes to absorb every nuance. She was no longer overlooked. She was recognized in the purest sense, through the emotional truth of her performance. As the final notes approached, she allowed herself a gentle control, guiding the music to a delicate conclusion. The last chord resonated through the hall, lingering in the silence that followed. For a brief moment, time seemed suspended, and she felt the connection between her and the audience solidify. The quiet girl who had been ignored and underestimated had spoken without words, and the room had listened intently. A soft exhale escaped her lips as she lifted her hands from the keys. She opened her eyes and took in the audience, noticing the awe and admiration in their faces. It was unlike anything she had experienced before. She had never played for attention or recognition, but this response filled her with a quiet joy, a validation not just of her skill, but of the emotional honesty she had poured into every note. She allowed herself a small, humble smile, acknowledging the moment without letting it inflate her ego. The performance had been about truth, about sharing a part of herself that few had ever seen. She had succeeded in that, and the response of the audience was a testament to the power of vulnerability and dedication. For the first time, she felt truly seen and heard, not for a superficial impression, but for the essence of who she was and the music she loved. The music continued to flow from her fingers, and the room had completely transformed. The audience, once restless and distracted, now sat in quiet awe. They had been expecting a simple, polite performance, the kind that was easy to forget. But what they heard was something else entirely, something that commanded their full attention. Every note carried emotion, every pause had meaning, and the room seemed to breathe with her playing. She could feel the connection with the audience strengthening. It was subtle at first, A few heads turning, eyes widening, but it grew into something more powerful. People leaned in, unconsciously drawn into the world she was creating with each keystroke. The skeptics who had dismissed her were now silent, captivated by the honesty and passion in her music. The quiet girl they had overlooked was now the center of their focus, not because she sought it, but because the music demanded it. Her fingers moved effortlessly across the keys, guided by years of practice and an inner understanding of the music. The hall seemed to respond to her, the acoustics amplifying every nuance, every subtle shift in tempo and tone. She was not playing to impress, not playing to win praise, but simply letting the music flow. Yet in doing so, she had achieved something remarkable. She had transformed the energy in the room, turning quiet curiosity into complete engagement. She noticed the subtle reactions of individuals around her. A few people had tears forming, some held their breath, and others sat completely still, absorbed in the performance. Teachers who had once doubted her now watched with admiration, their previous skepticism replaced with awe. She felt a mixture of humility and quiet pride, not in herself, but in the ability of the music to touch others so deeply. This was why she had devoted herself to the piano all those years, and now she understood the power of sharing her art with the world. As she moved into the more challenging sections of her piece, she felt her confidence grow. Each rapid passage, each delicate flourish was executed with precision and heart. She had spent countless hours refining these moments, not just for technical perfection, but for emotional impact. The audience responded instinctively, sensing the intensity and skill required, their focus unwavering. They were no longer merely observers. They were participants in the story she was telling through music. She could feel the tension building in the hall as the piece approached its climax. The melody rose and fell like waves, carrying the audience on an emotional journey. She imagined each person feeling a fragment of her experience. Her struggles, her moments of doubt, her quiet determination. The music was no longer just sound. It was a bridge between her heart and theirs, connecting them in a way words never could. The softer passages allowed her to breathe within the music, giving space for emotion to resonate. She added subtle dynamics, slight pauses, and gentle phrasing that drew listeners closer. Each note was intentional, a small detail that added depth and meaning. She felt a profound sense of responsibility, knowing that the audience was fully engaged and that her performance had the power to move them. The quiet girl who had been ignored for so long was now creating a shared experience that would linger in their memories. She noticed a few people exchanging glances, their expressions a mix of surprise and admiration. Some whispered softly to each other, trying to process what they were witnessing. Others sat with wide eyes, completely absorbed, unable to look away. It was a rare and beautiful moment, the kind of recognition that could not be forced or faked. It came naturally, earned through years of dedication, practice, and a genuine love for the art. Her confidence continued to grow as she neared the final sections. She was no longer nervous, no longer afraid of being overlooked. She was fully present, immersed in the music, allowing every emotion she had stored over the years to flow through her hands. The piano responded as if it were an extension of her soul, each note clear, precise, and filled with meaning. The audience was mesmerized, caught in the spell of a performance that was both technically masterful and deeply human. The climactic moments arrived, and she let herself be carried by the music. Her fingers flew across the keys with skill and emotion, creating a powerful and moving finale. The audience responded with instinctive attention, their silence a testament to the impact of her playing. She could feel the energy of the room shifting, the initial indifference replaced by admiration and awe. The music had transformed not just the space, but the people within it, capturing their hearts and holding them in the moment. As the final notes approached, she allowed herself to guide the music to a delicate and satisfying conclusion. The last chord resonated through the hall, lingering in the air like a whisper of emotion. For a brief moment, there was complete silence, a shared breath between performer and audience. She had given everything, not for applause or recognition, but for the music itself, and yet the response she received was more than she had ever imagined. She lifted her hands from the keys and opened her eyes, taking in the room. The audience was no longer indifferent or distracted. They were fully engaged, moved, and impressed. Some faces shone with tears, others with admiration, and a few with astonishment. The quiet girl who had been overlooked was now the focus of attention, not through showmanship or theatrics, but through the honesty and depth of her performance. It was a moment of transformation, both for her and for those watching. The applause began slowly, hesitant at first, then growing into a powerful, heartfelt response. People rose from their seats, clapping enthusiastically, some even cheering softly. She allowed herself a small smile, acknowledging the recognition without letting it inflate her ego. She had not played for attention, but the validation was a quiet affirmation that her dedication and authenticity had been seen and felt. The music had spoken, and the audience had listened, completely and sincerely. She took a moment to breathe, letting the sound of applause wash over her. It was a new experience, one she had imagined but never fully understood until now. The energy of the room was a reflection of the connection she had created through her music, a connection that transcended words and appearances. For the first time, she felt fully recognized, not just for skill, but for the emotional truth she had shared. As she stood to leave the stage, she felt a mixture of relief, pride, and gratitude. The music had carried her through fear and doubt, and had transformed the way she was perceived. She had been overlooked for so long, and now she had proven, in the most honest way possible, that her talent and dedication could not be ignored. The experience was not just about recognition. It was about the power of music to convey truth and create shared understanding. Backstage, she allowed herself to exhale fully, the tension finally leaving her body. The applause still echoed in her mind, a reminder that her quiet determination and love for the piano had led to something extraordinary. She realized that recognition, while gratifying, was secondary to the joy of expressing herself through music. She had found her voice, and in doing so, had touched the hearts of those who had once overlooked her. The transformation in the room mirrored a transformation within herself, a newfound confidence and sense of belonging that would guide her in the future. The final note lingered in the air, fading slowly until only the echo remained. The audience sat in stunned silence for a moment, absorbing the performance they had just witnessed. Then, as if awakened from a spell, the applause began. It started softly, a polite clapping from a few people, but quickly grew into a wave of appreciation that filled the hall. She sat for a moment, letting the sound wash over her, her heart pounding with a mixture of relief and joy. She had done it. She had played not for recognition but for the music itself, and now the world was finally paying attention. Standing, she felt a wave of warmth and gratitude. People were smiling, some wiping tears from their eyes, others nodding in silent acknowledgement. Teachers and performers who had once overlooked her were now coming forward, offering congratulations and admiration. She felt a mixture of humility and quiet pride. This was more than she had ever expected. It was not just applause. It was a recognition of her dedication, her emotions, and the truth she had shared through her playing. The hall buzzed with conversation as people discussed the performance. Some were astonished, speaking in hushed tones about how the quiet girl had captivated them, how they had never expected such depth and skill. Others complimented her on the precision and emotion of each note. She listened, smiling softly, feeling a sense of fulfillment that was deeper than mere praise. This was the moment she had hoped for, not for glory, but for understanding. Her music had spoken and people had listened. Her mentor came forward, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. The simple gesture spoke volumes, a silent acknowledgement of her talent and perseverance. She felt a swell of emotion, realizing how far she had come. She had faced doubt, fear, and countless moments of being overlooked, yet she had persisted. The piano had been her companion, her voice, and now it had become a bridge between her and others, connecting hearts through the honesty of her playing. Family and friends approached, their faces full of pride and joy. They spoke words of admiration, praising her for the courage and passion she had displayed. She responded with soft smiles and nods, still processing the whirlwind of emotions. She had always known that music was her way of communicating, but experiencing the impact firsthand was both overwhelming and beautiful. She realized that her quiet nature did not diminish her presence. It had allowed her to focus deeply on the music and express herself with authenticity. As she walked off the stage, the applause continued, echoing in her ears and lingering in her heart. She felt a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. Every step she took backstage was lighter than before, buoyed by the sense of accomplishment and connection she had achieved. She knew that this was a turning point, not just in the recital, but in how she viewed herself and her abilities. She had proven, first to herself and then to others, that dedication and passion could overcome doubt and invisibility. Backstage, she allowed herself to breathe fully, the adrenaline slowly fading. She felt the weight of nerves and anticipation lift, replaced by a quiet sense of satisfaction. She reflected on the journey that had led her to this moment, the hours of practice, the late nights, the moments of doubt, and the private triumphs. Each experience had shaped her, and now it had all culminated in a performance that had moved others and affirmed her own belief in herself. She spoke briefly with fellow performers, sharing smiles and congratulations. There was a sense of camaraderie, a mutual understanding of the effort and emotion required to perform. She felt accepted, not for showmanship or charm, but for the authenticity of her talent. It was a new kind of recognition, one that resonated deeply and would remain with her long after the applause had faded. Her thoughts returned to the music itself, the way it had flowed through her fingers and filled the room. She realized that the audience's reaction was a reflection of the honesty she had conveyed. They had responded not just to technical skill, but to the story and emotion behind each note. It was a powerful reminder that true artistry comes from sincerity and dedication, and that the quietest voices can sometimes speak the loudest through their work. As the evening continued, she noticed people approaching her with genuine admiration. Some asked questions about her technique, others wanted to know more about the inspiration behind the piece. She answered politely, her words simple but heartfelt, sharing the journey she had taken to reach this moment. Each conversation reinforced the connection she had created through her music, and she felt a renewed sense of purpose and confidence. She reflected on the moments when she had felt invisible, overlooked by teachers, peers, and even herself. Those moments had been painful, but they had also shaped her resilience and dedication. Now, seeing the impact of her music, she understood that those struggles had been necessary. They had taught her focus, humility, and the value of quiet perseverance. The recognition she received was not just about talent. It was about the journey, the persistence, and the authenticity that had carried her through. The hall slowly began to empty, but the energy of the evening lingered. She took one last look around, absorbing the atmosphere and the echoes of her performance. She felt a deep sense of gratitude, not just for the applause, but for the opportunity to share something meaningful with others. The experience had reinforced her love for music, reminding her that her passion and dedication could create connections that words often could not. As she packed up her music sheets and prepared to leave, she felt a quiet determination growing within her. This recital had been a milestone, a proof of her abilities and the power of perseverance. She knew that there would be other challenges ahead, other moments of doubt, but she also knew that she had the strength and skill to face them. The music had taught her patience, focus, and resilience, and now it had also taught her the value of being seen and heard for who she truly was. Walking out of the hall, she felt a sense of liberation and possibility. The world outside seemed different, filled with opportunities and potential. She realized that recognition, while gratifying, was not the ultimate goal. The true reward was the connection she had forged through her music, the ability to move others and express herself authentically. She felt empowered, ready to continue her journey with renewed confidence and purpose. She knew that the quiet girl who had once been overlooked had grown into someone capable of making a lasting impact. The journey was far from over, but she had proven to herself that dedication, passion, and honesty could overcome doubt and invisibility. As she walked home, the memory of the applause and the emotional connection with the audience remained, a reminder of the power of music and the importance of staying true to oneself. That night, as she lay in bed, she reflected on the entire experience. She felt a deep sense of fulfillment, knowing that she had given everything she had to the performance. She also felt a quiet excitement for the future, imagining new pieces, new opportunities, and the chance to continue sharing her music. The experience had been transformative, not just in the eyes of others, but within herself. She had discovered a confidence and a voice that could not be ignored, a voice that would guide her in all the moments yet to come.